welcome everyone else. So we have Griff Green and Lauren Luz from Giveth, Niran Babaloa, Lola from Panvala, and Ethan Steiner from Impact World, Evan Steiner, sorry, from Impact World, and Or Katzman from Impact Oracle joining us. Feel like, and Lawrence Ford from Conscious Capitalism, as well as Jordan Sukut rather, from Lionsburg. So going to put everyone up on the stage and just to give some framing. So Jordan was the person I first heard the term meta project from, and that's not a brand of a project, but that's more referring to this global movement or effort, this movement of movements that we were speaking about in the last panel on movement building, that so many of us are moving in the same direction, wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to facilitate the care of the earth, but of people everywhere. And so the question for today is, how do we fund the Meta project? How do we fund impact at scale? Most of us here are aware of Global Unity, if not on our Wisdom Council. And while we've developed a strategy that wouldn't require funding, because we have some folks that are looking to come on full time now, we are exploring that ourselves. And so the challenge, in the classic investment world, Global Unity is not something we're ever going to exit. And so how do we engage with investment? How do we engage with investors? And had we more time? And tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we'll hear from Niran and others on new economic models. I would love for Giveth to be centered as well. So rather than take this time to get into depth with everyone's models and structures, love to explore the topic broadly. And of course, if I would love, when you do speak for the first time, to introduce yourself and what you're working on, and maybe take a short moment to introduce the approach that what you're working on is centered around. But with that, we'll open it up. I'm going to put a few of our panelists in the center. But yeah. Hi, Lauren.
Oh, cool. I just appeared really big on my screen. I was like, oh no, what's happening? But hi, I'm Lauren Luce. I work with Giveth, and I'm happy to introduce myself now. So I'm a product lead at Giveth.io, which is a crypto donation platform. And on the topic of funding impact at scale, what we're doing is really trying to leverage Web3 tooling and DAO technology to help empower nonprofits who are really doing in real life impact, who are really providing the public goods in society that we need as a collective. So Giveth is doing that by meeting nonprofits where they're at, bringing them into the crypto space and starting to optimize the donation space, using issuance, using unique tokenomics mechanisms, and then just kind of going from there. So I won't go too long into that. It's just a short introduction. And yeah, and the only other thing about me is that I spend a lot of time working on Giveth, because this is something I care really deeply about. And I'll pass it to Niran.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. My name is Niran Babaloa. I'm the founder of Panvala. Panvala is a mass movement to shift every marketing dollar in our economy into the budgets of the communities that you and I are in, the cities we live in, online, wherever it is. We want communities to be able to dramatically increase their budgets by literally shifting every dollar that the largest corporations in our economy are currently pocketing as profit, and increases the budget of our communities instead. But yeah, it's always exciting to be in groups like this where people see the dramatic shifts that can happen in our society. And I think the more we talk about how people can make those shifts happen rather than how technology makes those shifts happen, I think that's really the core lens to be able to make this sort of movement happen. I will pass it to Or.
Hey, thanks. Hi, my name is Or Katzman. I work in impact measurement and management. I do all sorts of things in that sphere, currently helping Web3 organizations connect with impact, and impact organizations connect with Web3. And Impact Oracle is all about helping companies understand how to use the tools available to them in this emerging world to essentially internalize their externalities and be incentivized to create positive impact. I think that we're not starting the conversation, so I have so much to say, but I'll pass it on to Lawrence Ford.
Thank you, Orr. And Elliot, first of all, thank you for putting together this tremendous group of people and for the work you do to make the world a better place. I'm Lawrence Ford with Conscious Capital. It's nice to see some old friends on the screen I haven't seen for a while and some new ones. And I do work in the nexus of consciousness and capital. And for some people, that's a little bit odd. For me, it's like breathing. Our two most powerful tools we hold as a species: first, our consciousness, everything that we think of before we manifest it into the world. And then, of course, capital, this externally powerful tool that we've created in recent history. And I do that through Conscious Capital Wealth Management, which is a registered investment advisory firm that is redefining the way that people, industries work with the individuals and helping them live their reason for being here and align their investments with their values in the public markets. We're about to launch Conscious Impact, which is the next generation of finance, which Joseph, great talk. Thank you very much. And we're following on those coattails to help leverage a lot of the new technologies to be able to democratize investing for good in the world. And I'm also the founder and chairman of Future Capital, which is in partnership with the United Nations, where we convene some of the most extraordinary people around the globe to help solve big problems. And I will hand it off to Jordan. Hello, Jordan. Nice to see you.
Hey, Lawrence, great to see you. Hi, I'm Jordan. I am a builder, creator. I'm passionate about bringing intention into reality, and spent the last 20 years doing that in the realm of heavy civil infrastructure, roadways and dams. And now I'm turning that same lens to the future and to Earth as a whole, and how we can try to come together to collectively realize the future that many of us are envisioning. So great to be here, involved in supporting a lot of the different organizations represented on the call, and it's an honor to serve. I'll pass over to Joseph.
Thanks. I guess for anyone who didn't hear the original intro, my name is Joe Egan. I'm the founder of Anagram. Anagram is a digital assets holding company. We build products for the Web3 ecosystem in-house. We also advise companies within the Web3 ecosystem, and then we invest directly off our balance sheet. Prior to that, I spent about 5 years as the president of Polychain, one of the first and earliest investors in the crypto ecosystem. And prior to that, spent about 17 years within the traditional financial ecosystem. And with that, Griff.
Nice. Yeah, so I'm Griff Green. I'm a serial nonprofit-ish founder in the crypto scene. Giveth, Dapnode, Common Stack, now Praise, General Magic, Token Engineering Commons. I'm very involved there, and it's just a lot of different DAOs, basically, including my first project, which was the DAO, which didn't really work out all that well, but we learned a lot. And I'm really focused on how we can take, I really liked how Orr framed it with like internalizing these positive externalities, this idea that nonprofits and community groups and even government agencies are creating value for society, but there isn't like a great way for them to capture that value as much as there are for businesses and corporations. They have business models. And so I'm really excited about the opportunity to create economic models to kind of go above this requirement of a customer and satisfy the needs of organizations that are just trying to create value. And I think Evan is the last one to present.
Yeah, so nice to be with you. My name is Evan Steiner. I work for an organization called One Project. It's a foundation which is focusing on new economics and governance. And so we make grants in that space on kind of like radical post-capitalist economics and governance. And, you know, specifically to the conversation about innovative finance, yeah, it's always this perpetual inquiry on how are you financing public goods, how are you driving more resources to new economic models. I would say we have a few different lines of inquiry around that are going currently around developing of different financial products. And so I can share more about those. I don't want to take up the time now, but just to say that we just kind of have a portfolio around innovative finance to look at how to drive more resources in these directions. I don't know who to pass it to now.
Well, maybe we'll kick things off by hearing from anyone who feels inspired on where you feel the greatest levers are for funding impact at scale are, whether it be kind of traditional mechanisms that already exist or something you're working on or others are working on that can be a tool for accelerating good broadly.
Oh, go for it. You go for it.
All right, I'll go for it. I'll just say, I just kind of wanted to add a little bit of framing in this idea of what we mean when we talk about impact. And kind of impact can be thought of sometimes as a spectrum between kind of on one side, there's philanthropy for those things that will never create a return. And then you have, traditionally you could think about it as kind of like the ABCs. You can avoid harm, right, in your choices. You can benefit stakeholders, or you can contribute to solutions. And that's really useful to kind of what do we mean when we say impact? And that's a lot of the times how people also choose to allocate their funding, financing, whatever we're doing. I think that this is very much kind of ingrained in our current capitalist model, which says, your business has to have a model that creates returns, and if it does not, then it's a philanthropy. And what I see in this circle, and I know a lot of the work of a lot of the people around here, is we have a lot of in-betweens, right? We have all these kind of in-between models now that we're thinking about, and we're saying well, it doesn't have to be all the way, philanthropy. There's kind of somewhere in the middle with that, and you can have incentive models that are still creating public goods. You could still divert funds from one direction to another. And we can play around with the models. And I don't want to go too much into one model, but I think that's really helpful to start kind of thinking about what we mean when we're talking about funding impact and why this circle is really interesting.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there's a lot of interesting models, and there's even more being brought up because now we have programmable money. I like Owaki who's in a panel with us later in a couple hours, likes to throw down, I think he said in a tweet the other day, is that with programmable money, we can actually program our values into the money. And a lot of the times our values are not just about making more money. That's one thing that maybe we need to do once in a while, but there's a lot of interesting things that we can do now with issuance. You used to have an army to create an economy. Now you just need to know a couple of nerds and you can whip that thing out in a day or two. It's really incredible what we can do with blockchain technology and just the ability to issue a legitimate currency. And it's in this issuance that I find the most opportunity to actually create sustainable economies around public goods funding. Specifically, if you just look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin has created a public good. Now, some people may argue this, but if you define a public good as non-excludable and non-rivalrous, Bitcoin has, anyone in the world can create a Bitcoin address and receive money from anyone else in the world. That is non-excludable and that is non-rivalrous. So this is an incredible thing that has been built. An open tool for anyone to participate in international finance. And they didn't use taxes and they didn't use donations. They used issuance. Every 10 minutes, some Bitcoins given away to the people who are maintaining the value of the network. And I think that there's a lot of hope in taking this model and extracting it and applying it into meat space, into the real world where we have real needs, that we have public goods that are even more important than what Bitcoin can provide.
Yeah, I'd love
to
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Niran. Yeah, somebody was actually even just asking in the chat, what is public goods? And I think that's kind of important to sort of set out at the beginning. Like Griff was just describing Bitcoin as something non-excludable and non-rivalrous, and that's what public goods are. And right now we have the society that's structured so that private goods, you make the most profit off of them because you can exclude people from it. But when there's things like public goods and you're just actually adding value that anybody can enjoy without exclusion, without needing to buy a ticket, things like building roads for your community or things like taking care of the environment, then you can't really exclude people from it. And then there's not really the successful business model that you can generate a lot of funding. And then you see things like, so governments end up providing the majority of public goods. And then when governments fail to provide them, nonprofits start providing public goods as well. And then in the nonprofit sector last year, there was $10 trillion worth of funding that went as just spent on providing these public goods. There's no actual investment. This is kind of like Or was mentioning it, that it's like, there's philanthropy over here, and then there's kind of investing on the other side. And there's a lot of opportunity with like Web3, with creating issuance models, with creating DAOs that you can actually kind of like make the best of both worlds, where you can actually invest in impact causes, or you can actually start supporting nonprofit projects in a way where you become a stakeholder and you're actually a shareholder. And if they're successful, then you can actually benefit and you can profit. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there if we kind of leverage this technology.
Yeah, my favorite ideas about like how to fund this type of work are ideas that are hundreds of years old that I did not come up with. And those ideas really come from like the golden age of really civic life, especially in the United States, where we did have a vibrant third sector that wasn't the public sector. It wasn't private companies trying to solve problems and make a profit. It was really communities coming together in a mutualist type of organization to solve the problem that they saw in front of themselves with their own resources. And that to me is that kind of when people are like, oh, it's kind of like a company, but not really. Like that's really to me where the mutualist sector thrives. And in that vein, a lot of the kind of approach that type of organizing has had, some of it you can see in the labor movement, where if you're trying to organize workers, you approach them in a sense where you already know how powerful they all are, and you're trying to teach them that they're powerful and teach them how to wield that power. Workers have always been powerful, but they had to be organized to know how to use it and actually benefit from that power. In that same sense, I see this, the way to fund impact going forward is approaching each and every person across our society, recognizing that there's a power they already have and teaching them how to use that power so they can actually wield it. And to me, that power that everybody has is the ability to control value that is spent to access them in our economy. There's so many businesses that are just based on selling access to people, where you're basically a middleman making money because you sell people to other people or businesses. Google and Facebook, all their money comes from selling people. That's their business. They sell people. On the other end of the spectrum, not new businesses, but very old businesses. If you think of a landlord, when they're selling you access to that piece of land, they're selling you access to the people that are around you. Like you're being sold to each other. We're all being sold to each other. When we want to come together and spend time to one another, with one another, somebody is making money. We have to pay for access to one another. So if you teach people that they have this power that Google and Facebook are pocketing, that landlords on the other end of the spectrum are pocketing, and show them how to wield that power in a new way, there are tons of resources that we can use to make progress on the kinds of impact we want to see, or to just have a good time with the people we want to have a good time with. Like it doesn't have to be a do-gooder kind of cause, but it can really just be teaching people how to use power they already have in our economy and have that value flow to them rather than middlemen. Like it is not far-fetched at all to see to be able to talk about how there are new ways to fund impact in our society. If you see what Henry George saw over 100 years ago, that there's all this value being created in our economy that's being pocketed by middlemen. And if we teach people how to get that value back, they can use it for the things to move our world in the way they want to move it. That to me is where I see our world heading.
Build on what Aaron said and go from, we talked about some of the things we know how to do, or we're starting to learn how to do around funding individual efforts, let's say through quadratic funding or some of these other things that are emerging. Aaron just talked about there's a lot of latent flows that are already there and individual value that's being captured, let's say by parties right now, that we could push back out into individuals and teach them about the power that's already there. And then the building on what Grace said in the chat, the part that I don't know how to do, and the reason that Elliot and I kind of talked about this panel a little bit, is I think we kind of know how to go fund individual small things, right? What I'm grappling with and haven't solved yet, so it's a question, not a solution, is let's say that we're entering something like a meta crisis, and that a lot of the symptoms we're seeing are flowing from deep root causes like our fundamental way of being as a human species. And let's pretend that needed to be transformed, and then let's pretend that we had to time box that, and we thought that maybe a lot of that transformation needs to occur like in this decade or over the next 10 years. And let's pretend that humanity had articulated some universal goals and values, such as you could find in the UN SDGs or any of these different ontologies. But we know that if we love someone, we don't want them to be suffering and hungry and under injustice or totalitarian regimes or whatever it is, right? So we know what we would want for someone we love. And we not only have the aspiration of these goals we want to accomplish, but we have let's call that the meta project, this moment in human history that we're all engaged in, but we also have this meta crisis that's impelling us, and then we're boxed into time. Okay, so over the last few years, I've been trying to identify who are the highest leverage leaders and organizations that are out there. What are the problems and needs, and how do we get them funded and powered so that each of them can be what they're called to be at this moment in history, and how you do that collectively. So what I'm observing in the network is, let's say through conversations with the leaders of these different nodes, that I'm aware of, 10 different organizations that I as a human deeply believe are critical and have key leverage points that could unlock the broader scale movement and impact that we're trying to achieve. And let's say that each of those organizations has a need for their next $2 to $5 million in funding for their next X number of years of development, right? So you end up with this aggregated basket where if I, as a builder, am looking at this moment in human history, it's like, okay, we need the next $50 million tranche to secure the core teams of the 10 different organizations that we could all name that we would want to power. What I see happening right now in the network is that essentially each of those organizations that need their next $2 or $5 or $10 million to fund their roadmap are out competing for the same pools of funding and attention, rather than figuring out how we can align and fund in aggregate, right? So I'd be interested in, the panelists can decide whether to pick up this ball or go back to the other conversation, but I'm really, really interested in this question of, let's say that the people on this call collectively discern a basket of things that must move together if humanity is going to succeed and not fail. And let's say that's a total stack of 20 or $100 million that's needed over the next 5 years. And if we could secure that, everybody could get back to work on their unique missions rather than going and chasing money. So I'm interested in that conversation, if anybody else is, on kind of the funding at scale of the things the community discerns is important.
And I have something to add to the question you put out, but I'm not on the panel.
On behalf of the panel, Daniel, feel free to chime in.
There's this really great strategic group some of us know here called Group Partners. Do these wonderful visual expressions, legendary expressions, with lots of organizations we respect. And they say 80% of their work over 30 years has come down to what's the right question we need to ask. And they say if we go in and do that job wrong, with the wrong question, we solve the wrong problem. People like us who raise capital for projects, we're really producers, not just capital raisers, nurturing, mentoring things from idea to reality. And most of us spend 10 times as much of our time chasing money as we do doing what we love, which is producing projects, which we need to, with the time frame humanity has, we need to switch that. So we spend 1/10 of our time on raising capital. And I think the appropriate question isn't where's the capital, but how do we manufacture capital so we don't have to compete for the capital that's out there, that's manufactured for this purpose? In the same way that we hypothecate and manufacture human survival on an economic scale post survival, of wars, right? where when we directly invest into human beings with as few, as we've all talked about here today, filters as possible, and directly into human beings who do produce more than they consume, especially when it comes to the agency that we're talking about. And we already have that number you're asking about. When we look at the SDG gap of which we could argue over this number, Paul Pullman says it's $3.5 trillion deficit in what we've already mapped out. Let's say it's human infrastructure, those 17 SDGs. We've already mapped out that the bridges and roads need $3.5 trillion, but it's not coming from government, which is too dysfunctional. It's not coming from nonprofit for the reasons we've talked about. And so it has to come from us, the private sector. But we have a problem, which is that it's too high risk. That's the real issue. We're not solving the risk problem. We're looking for money. If we ask our question of how do we make it safe for even non-investors to participate, like during World War II or World War I, when we raised more than $3.5 trillion in bonds from non-investors, because we created this safety mechanism for finance where the government would protect those war bonds. What is the peace bond or the survival bond of this moment for human survival that's far greater of an investment than it would have been back when our grandparents did it? To me, that's the question. How do we create the safety for the money so we can manufacture the money to invest it in human sustainability?
So just to quickly build and sum up everything we just said, one question we could ask, then go over to Or is I think what you're pointing at, Daniel, is what are the conditions that would allow that to occur, right? And apparently we haven't yet created those conditions because it's not happening. I love what Grace just dropped into the chat. Again, it's maybe 1/100th of our time chasing funding instead of doing the critically needed work that's going to help us through this moment in history. And so it's what's the set of conditions that would change what I'm witnessing right now, where all these valuable people who could be executing their missions are spending way too much of their time competing for the same funding resources. And then when I go talk to funders, they're frustrated too. So there's a set of conditions that's not present that we need to co-create that fixes that. It's maybe something like that. Sorry, Or.
No, it's fine. I mean, it adds. So I mean, I think that what's unspoken kind of in the background of all of this is that it doesn't necessarily pay to be impactful. The incentive mechanisms, the way to find funding, all this stuff doesn't align with what we think that we ought to value. And in that sense, our economy is flawed, and it is run by nation states at this point in time. And I think that what we're I think that the opportunity with Web3 and with all the projects here is kind of what can we do to change our economic system? If we would be able to internalize externalities, if we would be able to put a price tag on the things that we actually value, I think a lot of these things would kind of fall into place, right? This is the opportunity, I think, with magic internet money, but also with doing it right and having large groups of people get behind something. That's what gives fiat its power, and I think that that's what can give new forms of tokens or credits or whatever you like also value. And I think that kind of puts a lot of the different threads that were just brought up kind of together.
Maybe one thing to add, someone before I forget who, I'm sorry, was talking about programmable money, and we've also been talking about alignment of incentives. I think one thing that's interesting to reconsider is how to formulate the outcomes that we want to get. So what are the programmable outcomes that we can look for? So within a smart contract, how can we actually look for more micro tasks that we want to accomplish, have that be embedded within that smart contract so that upon success, perhaps, of my idea to solve climate change, maybe too grand of an idea, but nonetheless, I actually make a substantial amount of money. But then there's also incentivized wind down. I think one of the problems of corporations today, even nonprofits today, is this perpetual growth that everyone seeks, right? If you're not growing as a corporation, someone will sell your shares. If you accomplish your goal, perhaps you should wind down your organization and pay people the success as opposed to going out and raising the next round of funding. So I think if we can find novel ways to incentivize actual outcomes and actual specific timeframes or the wind down, if those outcomes are not achieved, then we can think about as opposed to having a nonprofit, having a task at hand. So today, a company is hinging on jobs, a job is hinging on projects, and projects hinge on tasks. I think you could say the same thing for corporations or nonprofits today. So like, what are the tasks and then the projects that we can focus on more specifically and fund those more specifically with embedded outcomes and timeframes associated with those, so we incentivize as opposed to growth, the wind down.
I wanted to share something real quick that I understand how the reasons why the conversation has gone a lot in the directions of programmable money and Web3, and how do you internalize social and ecological costs into currency design and to financial products. I think that's all really a wonderful direction to explore that's becoming more available. Just want to add on that a lot of our work focuses more on how are you interfacing with the current holders of capital. As if you look at where the large amounts of money sit, with pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, banking infrastructure, CDFIs, there's a huge amount of existing infrastructure, and a lot of the focus is building, credit enhancement facilities, building bond products, building financial products that more traditional financial structures know what they are and look a little bit more familiar. There's also been a lot of work done over the past decade, especially within the impact investment, to kind of evolve some of those structures. So I recommend the book Adventure Finance by Ani Patton, for example, because it goes through a lot of the different structures that were evolved. So I just want to also put out that there's a couple of different strategies. One goes into kind of Web3 and currencies, and some of them are maybe a bit more traditional, and I think, or that are still innovative, but are looking at how you target more traditional financial actors. And I think both strategies are important.
One pattern that for me is coming up in what people are saying, like they wish they had, especially when you compare to things like war bonds to be able to, fight World War II, things like that. Like a lot of us, I think, wish we had the power to tax. Like, oh man, if I just had a cut of that tax revenue, then being able to fund the project that I want to do impact, oh man, that would be pretty great. I wouldn't have to like go out and like bang on doors for money. I would just tax and then I would spend, and it would be great. And I actually think that would be pretty great, except, the negative connotations of tax. You're forced to do it. It goes to the government. It's really inefficient. That all sounds bad. But to me, a better order for us to be living in would be one where any leader of some sort of impact project or any leader of any community, to be honest, felt like they had the power to tax. And not really tax that comes out of the pockets of their members directly, maybe tax that comes out of maybe the transactions they're making in the economy. So maybe again, instead of the tax that Facebook and Google are putting on every merchant in our economy, maybe that tax is going to some sort of project you care about. Again, it still has to get spent. You can't make it not get spent, but you can move where it goes. Maybe instead of like property and your tax that you're paying to be able to access a piece of earth that currently goes to landlords, maybe a part of that could go to some community you care about, whether it's a arts organization, whether it's a impact project, maybe you just like playing sports with people and you want to be able to take some of the resources there. Like if you felt like you had the power to tax, it would kind of feel like you had this endowment that's following you to every community you care about, to any project you care about. And again, instead of having to bang on doors to raise money, what you're doing as a community leader or project leader is just getting members, getting followers, getting more people who support what you want to do, because at the end of the day, there's an endowment following them anywhere they go. The same way every citizen has a bucket of tax dollars. If you lose your citizens, they're going to fund some other government than your own. That same sort of mentality, if we had that for voluntary efforts, I think that would be a more flexible order, one that produced better outcomes. I think we would all get closer to where we want to be. We just have to build that order from scratch. And I think that's within our grasp.
I think something that's missing with this kind of like tax model is the ability for the people being taxed to then like have a more constant avenue for feedback and to be able to like provide feedback to the people that are paying taxes to. And then like it's like, okay, they can kind of like choose their leaders, their community leaders, but you still have this kind of like top-down approach to taking care of impact causes or providing for an impact cause. And something I think is really interesting is like just all the tooling and all the work that we're doing in DAOs and all the work that we're doing around creating new voting mechanisms, and like creating voting mechanisms where people who provide capital can have power, but so can people who have been around a long time or people who have expertise in a certain field. And then I think that like if we can create better ways of like distributing like voting power and governance power in decentralized ways, and also just like ways that aren't just like, you know, tokenized completely and plutocratic, and maybe there's this, or there could be like different tokens for different merits, then you can kind of have the collective providing more feedback into whatever impact is being created, and then you can actually have like better influence of the end users on the products being provided. Like something, I mean, I see this like in education and healthcare a lot, that you end up with top-down capital controlled systems, so that like the you know, the healthcare solutions that are being provided are also kind of going back into funding big pharma. But like, what if we actually kind of had like all kinds of different people with different healthcare backgrounds being able to influence it, and then also the people who are getting sick, and then like using the healthcare products that are being provided? What if like they had a better say in kind of that feedback mechanism? I think that like this governance over public goods is something that's like really, really attractive and valuable. And if we can kind of like crack the governance over public goods nut, then it can be something that's like that people really want to invest in, because they really want to have control over those things. And then we can meet the people who have capital in society where they're at now and have them like want to have influence over these public goods. And I think that this is like one way, it's like using programmable money at the same time as using DAO tooling and novel voting mechanisms to really solve the problem of like having the best public goods being funded in a way that's regenerative.
So I'll chime in here. I've been enjoying all of these conversations, and it reminds me that of what my belief is that we have all the solutions. And what this time is calling us as a species is to come together with our glasses half full, because there is an incredible paradox of when we become very good at something, it's difficult for us to learn more or engage with others because we think we have all the answers. So from a macro societal point of view, what I'd like to put out here in this conversation is that the answers are all out there, because we do have all the genius and we have the inspiration and the tools to solve the problems. And there's two things I want to say about this. One is that it is a time for all of us to really put attention on what does that look like about us truly all coming together. And how does that operate? I know Jordan and I have spent a lot of time talking about this, and I've worked on this for years. And we have some pretty exciting stuff. We're looking to make an attempt at this collaboration on a global scale. So that's the one thing I want to just put out there for everybody to sit deeply with. The second thing is, what if we forgot to really even ask the most important question of all, which is, what is our greatest form or highest form of capital? What is true wealth? And as fundamental as that gets, when we start building all these tools and governance and techniques, which are very important to transform our species in the time it needs to be transformed, if we're not dealing with the core soul issue of what I see, and I'd like to just throw out there to this group that I see as the issue, is the fundamental error in what is valuable. And what if, as a species, as a humanity, the highest point of value that we put out there was each other's gifts, and that we recognized each other's gifts as the highest form of capital. And we use these new technologies, as Joe, you were speaking of for a little bit, to really start with that base foundation and to be able to apply that value and be able to match that value with interests and opportunities out there in the world and a marketplace, and working with the current system and the current tools we have. Now, I know that's very 30,000 feet because everybody was digging in. So I figured the point that I would like to bring across in the conversation is that And we can either continue on that or just move into other applications with that. Thank you.
Just want to weave a couple of these ideas back together. So if it's true that that we're the most basic thing that's valuable and can solve this, and each of us has unique gifts and superpowers, and we're all failing to accomplish the universal goals and values in isolation, right? That demands some kind, it demands that we forge ourselves into some kind of higher order functional unity that's actually capable of meeting this moment in history. And we haven't done that yet, right? And like the clock's ticking. So a lot of things become possible if we forge that higher order functional unity. You know, Joseph mentioned the life cycle, right? The way that we're setting up companies and nonprofits and all these things right now in isolation incentivizes them all to perpetuate themselves eternally until they eventually fail, right? If we're operating in functional unity, all these things can have their own lifespans and rise and fall, and we can engage in our unique superpowers for short periods of time, finish the task, be rewarded for it, right? And then move to the next team and the next project, right? So I think all these things kind of go together. And Niran mentioned the idea of taxing ourselves, right? It's absolutely insane that we're not all coordinating 1/10 of our resources and effort to meet this moment in history, right? It's like, it's insane. We are like committing suicide by not doing that. So, but we can't really coordinate 1/10 of our time and effort and engage in these short-term things until we learn to value each other and each other's gifts and realize that none of us can do it in isolation. And so that, in my mind, that for years and years and years, that keeps being the answer. It's like, what's the one thing that's missing that everybody thinks is possible, that if we could solve it, every other hurdle would fall in place? And it's something like that unity there. We truly see each other and we truly value each other's gifts, and we're truly committed, not just intellectually or contractually, but at like the deep cellular soul level, to working together with all our might to meet this moment in history. And if we did that, and if the world can see that, in my mind, that's the fundamental condition that then lets the capital flow. I can't see that if the people on this call went out to the world and said, we are small, but we're mighty, and we have all these different networks, and they represent thousands of people, and we have each of these superpowers, and we're committed to work together to meet this moment in history. Here's what's needed. And I think we're deluding ourselves. It's like, yes, we need all of the Web3, Web4, Web5 tools. And there's a lot of people that are working on these causes that like need to pay rent and pay software developers next month. And there's like a little escape problem, right? So pursuing those both, but just to me, it's like, it's just the intention and the will. Lawrence said we have all the answers. I totally believe that. We have all the gifts, we have all the networks, everything that's at hand. It's like the missing condition is us deciding to do it, right? And once we make that decision and we commit to it with all our might, everything else becomes possible. So that's my.
And Jordan, I want to just do a quick comment just to wrap that up. I appreciate that very much. And what if we had a marketplace that played in a fiduciary regulated way, unlike what happens in 80% of what's happening out there today, to be able to enable that, along with the ability to be able to have a movement to bring people together to do the hardest thing in the world, which is the due diligence on these small projects, right? I mean, that's always the block. And so I call that crowd diligence. And then, of course, we have the ability through Web 3.0 blockchain and smart contracts, the ability to be able to fund these in an efficient way that lets us avoid the controls of the old guard and iBanks that are holding on with their fingernails.
Okay, so we're just at time, so I want to wrap, but I wanted to maybe harmonize a few of the thoughts I think are really important. And on, you know, what Niran was speaking to and what Lauren was speaking to, I really encourage everyone, if you can make it, to come to tomorrow's new economic models sessions. Very excited for what Niran and the team at Panval are building, the model they have, because it seems like they really have what he was describing already designed. And so if you're not aware of it, I highly encourage you to get exposed. But I think a few really important pieces that were thrown out are both in broad strokes, creating something new, but also recognizing the importance of integrating with existing systems. Joe talked about programmable money, or establishing the values, deciding what values our currencies should embody or aspire or point us towards. And I think the next level of that is not just kind of doing that in a centralized way where we decide once what those values are, but embedding kind of to the spirit that Lauren was pointing to, embedding the capacity for those values to be reprogrammed by people on an ongoing basis. And for those familiar with the global unity economic model we're working on, we describe it as an economy not based on value, but based on values, not based on goods, but based on good, a meaning economy. And the idea is, how do we, and I think what we're all pointing to is, how do we use the tools that Joe spoke to in his talk to not just program money, but to program organizations, collective ownership? Can we have a world really that Jordan's speaking to, the world that's collectively owned and funded? And I think what I would love, I mentioned earlier that we've been running impact niche masterminds, bringing leaders like yourselves from different sectors of impact together. And I'd love to coalesce one on specifically on funding and bring you all together for another gathering outside of this event, because I feel like we could have gone much longer and much deeper, but I want to honor that we've got Stuart Williams coming up. So with that, we'll wrap this session, but I want to share great appreciation for everyone being here. I hope we get to connect again and really explore this, because I think everyone brings a wealth of experience and insight that and different perspective that together, we have depth perception because we have two perspectives. What happens when we get 10 or 100 or 1,000 together? So really appreciate everyone sharing their perspectives and work and ideas. And I encourage us to continue in the chat. If there are folks who didn't get to ask questions, if there are folks on panel that didn't get to share any of their ideas, please stick around and continue the conversation. And hopefully we can continue another time as well. But thank you very much to everyone.